Welcome, Fright Night Vault listeners. You found us in the dark for a reason. If you're new here, subscribe to the Vault and never walk alone again. Tonight's story, hospital ghost story, night shift voices, and the patient who wasn't discharged, starts now. My first night inside the old Hawthorne County Hospital tasted like pennies and photocopier dust. Not the clean antiseptic bite I expected, but the stale sweetness of paper and tape, of things sealed and then forgotten. They'd stripped the place to wires and bed springs years ago, leaving only the south wing intact until the demolition survey signed off. That was my job. 12 nights, solo, a radio on my belt, and a ring of keys big enough to chew circles in my hip. Keep squatters out. Keep kids from daring each other to film in the morgue. Keep the lights off unless you had to. The building settled around me as I signed into the log at 2200, block letters printed by a dozen nameless guards who'd come and gone since the hospital closed. The lobby clock didn't work, but I checked my watch from habit. 10:01. The janitor's bucket in the corner still smelled faintly of ammonia, though no one had cleaned these floors in years. The generator hummed somewhere deep below, slow and even, like breath under blankets. We'd been briefed that the south wing had its own power loop for the elevator test and exit lights. Nothing else. No overhead fluorescence unless you tripped in emergency, no hallway music, no cheerful volunteer at the information desk to mispronounce your name, just the red glow over exit signs and the narrow pane of my mag light cutting the dust. I did my first sweep like they taught us, clockwise. Main lobby, radiology corridor, pharmacy cage, cafeteria doors chained shut, then down the spine of the building to the cross corridor marked south. The sign still hung there with its plastic letters, some missing, so it read SUTHWIG. That gap made the hall look like it had been taught to say its own name and forgot. The south wing doors were fire-rated, with wire mesh diamonds under the glass and hinges that sounded like an old man getting out of bed. Beyond them, the hallway ran straight, then turned left toward the isolation rooms, then bent back again like somebody drew it drunk. Paint bubbled where leaks had run behind the walls. On the right, the nurses' station curved like a half moon, its countertop mottled with tape ghosts and coffee rings. Behind it, cubbies, drawers, the pass-through window to the medication room with its bulletproof glass. That glass reflected my flashlight back at me, a coin of light flipping every time I moved. I checked each patient room. Beds gone, curtains gone, hand sanitizer dispensers empty and grinning like open mouths. The call buttons above each bed still had little red LEDs that should have been dead. But when I pressed one, a light blinked on at the nurse's station, a patient calling a nurse who would never come. I turned it off. The tiny relay click sounded too loud. In room 214, the window overlooked the parking lot where nurses used to smoke at 2 in the morning and tell each other the bad jokes that keep people whole. 3 cigarette butts rested on the sill, stubbed down to paper, blackened as if burned yesterday. In room 218, a child's sticker clung to the wall near the headboard. A blue whale with a smile smudged by a small thumb. It was the only color in the room. When I made it to the isolation rooms, the door to 231 was propped open by a wedge of folded cardboard. That shouldn't have been there. The key for 231 was heavier than the others, stamped isolation in a font that made the word look polite. I pocketed the cardboard and let the door swing shut. The latch engaged with a hushed, airtight certainty. The window had a sliding port, the kind you pass a thermometer through without breaking the seal. My reflection hovered in the glass, pale, eyes ringed by the flashlight spill. I was alone. The elevator at the end of the corridor was dead, supposedly. It was taped off with orange mesh and a paper sign that read, "Out of service," in the careful block printing of someone who didn't trust a typed sign to be believed. I ran my light across the call buttons. The down arrow wore a thumb grease halo. I imagined all the times it had been tapped by someone timing their breath, asking steel to move faster. On the back wall of the nurse's station, a whiteboard waited with grid lines drawn in black. Date, room, MDRN, notes. Someone had taken a red dry erase marker and written, years ago, discharged by midnight. Then, beneath it, a name, Thorn, L. The name had been rubbed and rewritten enough that the lines were ghostly now, a palimpsest of the same instruction repeated until it stained. In the locker under the desk, I found a folded schedule. The last week of operation. Half the shifts were circled, half had small crosses next to them. My own last name lived there in pencil, as if I'd been penciled into the past. I finished the sweep and wrote the time in the logbook, 22:47. All clear. The words felt like a lie in my mouth, and I wasn't even speaking them. It was the way the building breathed that unnerved me. The way the exit signs' red faces made everything look blood warm. The way the isolation door had that wedge of cardboard, as if someone wanted it open and then changed their mind. On my second pass, I heard it. Not a footstep, not a voice. Something smaller and more patient. A soft paged flip from the nurse's station, the sound a chart makes when a hand turns a page and a paperclip sighs. I knew that sound because everyone knows that sound. Even if you've never lived in a hospital, your body recognizes it. Paper keeping track of you. The flashlight found the countertop, the cubbies, the dry erase board glint. The sound stopped when my light touched the desk, then resumed when it drifted away. Not loud, not showy, like breathing again. I told myself it was air through a vent, air doing tricks with old forms. I told myself a lot of things. I walked behind the desk and found an old 3-ring binder. No cover, just a spine scabbed with tape. It should have been empty. They told us everything had been shredded or digitized before the closure, but the binder held a dozen plastic sleeves. Inside each sleeve, a discharge form. Most of the lines were blank. Diagnosis, blank. Medications, blank. Notes, blank. Patient, Thorn, L. I put the binder down and counted to 5. The generator hummed in time. The elevator at the end of the hall made a sound it shouldn't be able to make. A relay closing, a cable tensing. The down arrow blinked once and went out. I told myself I'd imagined it. I went to check anyway. The call button was dark. The little 7-segment display above the door was dead. The tape across the doors fluttered minutely as if someone were breathing behind it. I pressed my fingers to the steel and felt it cool and curiously damp like a soda can in summer. When I turned to go, the down arrow pulsed again. Slow, a heartbeat you can see through skin. I stood very still and listened. The hospital loved my stillness. It filled it right up. The second night bled into the third the way long shifts do. You arrive at dusk, you leave at dawn, and the hours between are like a waiting room with no magazines. I told no one about the binder. I told no one about the elevator light. It's not that I didn't want to be believed. It's that I wanted to be wrong. If I was wrong, then all I needed to do was keep walking, keep checking doors, keep drinking bad coffee from a thermos that always smelled like last week's soup. Each night the South Wing introduced a new small thing and then behaved as if nothing had happened. My radio crackled with a voice that used my name and then fell silent with no call sign. A call light blinked above room 218 while I stood in the doorway, no bed beneath it to justify the plea. In the cafeteria, the soda machine displayed a scrolling message that read, "Service needed," then, for 2 seconds, displayed the word code in blocky green. The binder at the nurse's station added pages. On night 5, there were 13 discharge forms with the same name and more lines filled in. The handwriting varied: black ink, blue ink, left-hand slant, right-hand neatness. Whoever had filled them out had disagreed with themselves. Diagnosis ranged from pneumonia to aspiration to failure to thrive, which is the phrase hospitals use when bodies give up like neighborhoods with too many boarded windows. In the medication room, the pass-through window's sliding port was unlatched on night 6. I slid it closed. The click felt like a promise and a dare. The elevator behaved. The down arrow did not blink for 3 nights in a row. On the 4th, I rounded the corner and found the doors standing open on a darkness that didn't reflect my light. The tape hung in 2 strips like peeled skin. Inside, floor tiles scuffed by 1,000 gurneys. Back wall with a handrail. Control panel. The red stop switch had been thumbed so many times the word had worn thin. The floor indicator above the door was dead, but someone had pressed 3 of the buttons so hard the plastic had cracked into spider lines. 2, 3, and B. I told myself there was a rational reason. The contractors had come during the day. They had used the elevator for inspection and forgot to retape the doors. I would find a note in the log saying as much. The log was blank where my entry should have been. First line, 2200. Next line, a wide white gulf. Beneath that, a signature I didn't recognize, Thorn. The pen had dug deep. The page tore a little. It wasn't a signature, it was a diagnosis. I found the duct tape in the security closet and retaped the elevator myself. Ugly crossed X that made me feel like I had done something, anything. When I pressed the tape flat, I felt the doors exhale. Back at the nurse's station, the whiteboard had been cleaned. No red marker stains, no grids. In its place, someone had drawn a patient census with dates from the week the hospital closed. 6 names, 5 room numbers, 1 note. Hold for discharge midnight. The penmanship looked like every nurse I'd ever known all at once. Fast, decisive. The way you write when the writing isn't the point, the patient is. I picked up the dry erase marker left on the tray and drew a line through the word, hold. It didn't stick. The line faded as if the board were thirsty for it. I wrote my own name in the corner to prove the marker worked. It did. My name looked wrong on that board, a bruise blooming on porcelain. I wiped it away with the heel of my hand, but the ghost of it stayed. Faint, like a memory you don't entirely trust. The first voice came at 3:12 on night 7. Not the radio, not the generator. A woman's voice, pitched in that calm that lives just below panic. Room 217, chart. The syllables had the rhythm of muscle memory. The voice came from behind the nurse's station as if a nurse had just turned from a cabinet with a handful of forms and needed a second set of hands. 217 chart. I stood in the doorway to 217, and my light found the whale sticker again in 218, and I thought about how you could live your whole life inside a corridor if the doors kept opening. 217 chart. Soft frustration now, the way people speak to colleagues they like but don't have time for. Please. I went behind the desk and lifted the binder. The sleeves stuck to each other with static and then sighed apart. Inside, a discharge summary, fully filled, for room 217. Patient, Thorn, L, age 63, diagnosis, aspiration pneumonia secondary to dysphagia, notes, discharge midnight, home with family. A pen lay on the counter. I hadn't brought it. The hospital had no pens. I picked it up and it was warm as if someone else had just put it down. I turned to room 217 because the voice had said 217, and because human beings are not complicated machines. We go where we're told, especially when we're told gently. The room was a square of dark and window glass, my light reflected back to me in smutty silver. I knew there would be no bed. I knew the rails would be gone, and the oxygen port would be capped, and the wall clock would be stuck at a time no one remembered noticing. I knew these things, and still, when my light hit the far wall and found the outline of a head on the paint where a bed had once been pushed for years, I had to put my hand to the doorframe to steady myself. I said, "Who's there?" Because that is what you say, because it makes you feel like you're the one doing something. A breath moved the dust where the pillow had once been. Not a draft, not a vent. The space above the mattress-shaped shadow was full in the way of rooms with people in them. The overhead call light blinked once, soft, then settled to red. 217 chart. From behind me now, at the station again, patient tone. A request shaped like an order, a bedtime instruction, a radius we all live inside. Someone asks, you respond. I carried the binder to the doorway and held it as if that mattered. I stood where the bed would have been and tried to picture the last night of operation here, the last patient, the last nurse, the last chart. A room full of almosts. The window showed my flashlight flaring and fading as if it didn't want to commit to me. 217, the voice said, but the numbers slid, the way numbers do when you're tired, and so are they. 231. A beat. Isolation. The isolation door I had wedged closed with certainty stood ajar when I walked back into the hall. The cardboard wedge I had pocketed on night one had reappeared beneath it, folded and refolded until the paper had the texture of cloth. I pushed the door open with the binder edge. The air inside was colder, not like weather, but like the inside of a freezer right after you've turned it off. The cold that lingers because it likes the shape of the space. In the glass, my face looked like someone who might be mistaken for someone else. On the counter, beneath the pass-through, a single form lay waiting, not in a sleeve, not sealed. Patient, Thorn, L, discharge, 00:00, disposition, pending signature. The pen warmed in my hand. No one tells you how quiet a signature is, how anticlimactic a name can be when a building has been holding its breath for years. I stood with the form, and my hand hovered and my body did the thing hands do when they remember school and tax forms and penmanship grades. The name tugged me into writing it. It is hard to explain this without sounding like I want you to believe a movie. It wasn't possession. It wasn't a voice in my head. It was procedure, a hallway full of closed doors and one open, a line and a pen and a space that wants ink the way mouths want water. I signed THORNL because that was what the form needed, not because it was my name. The ink settled matte on the paper. The line glistened for a beat and then sank as if the sheet were drinking me in. At the nurse's station, the whiteboard updated itself the way boards do when a good charge nurse keeps the ward honest. Discharge. Complete. The word wrote itself in a fierce hand, then softened as if touched. Beside it, the elevator bell chimed. It shouldn't have been able to chime. It did anyway. A clear, small sound, like a spoon on glass. The doors slid open against my tape and the X distorted, adhesive threads going white with strain, then snapping. The car waited with an animal patience. Inside, the panel lights had no power, and yet I could see the numbers. B glowed the color of old teeth. 2 and 3 breathed like sleeping things. I don't know why I stepped in. I don't know why any of us ever step into any mouth and trust it to close and open in our favor. The doors sighed shut. The car did not move. My reflection wavered in the stainless steel. Dust motes hung in the beam of my flashlight like a constellation that wanted to be a patient's bracelet number. The buttons did not respond when I pressed them. The stop switch felt like a scar. The lights above the door counted floors I couldn't feel. B, 1, 2. The car stayed still. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the hospital moved around me and the elevator stayed exactly where it was, which is somehow worse. The bell chimed again, and the doors opened to a hallway I had not walked but knew anyway. The pediatric ward. Wallpaper ghosts on the walls where animal decals had been peeled and taken home in lunchboxes. A plastic glove on the floor with 2 fingers tied in a knot by someone who had learned a trick to make a child smile. The nurse's station, a smaller version of South's, with a jar of brittle tongue depressors whose wood smelled like every waiting room in the world. I stayed in the car. 217. the voice said from nowhere and everywhere, and then I heard the sound of wheels, a squeak sing every fourth rotation, a gurney singing to itself the way they all do when one wheel is off. It came toward me down the center of the corridor, slow and relentless. I couldn't see it. I didn't raise my light. It would have felt rude somehow to flash a patient in the eyes. The doors closed. The car blinked 3. The bell chimed. The doors opened to oncology. The paint here had a different sheen. The smell of tape was stronger. On the far wall, someone had written, "You are braver than you feel," in marker, and someone else had tried to clean it and given up, leaving the words blurred like a closed eye. The gurney sang again, closer. I could hear the footfalls now, soft slipper sound. Not a nurse, not a doctor. Patient steps. The pause hitch breathe that comes with IV poles and chest tubes, and everything that makes you walk upright only because lying down is worse. I pressed close door. The button didn't fight me. The doors obeyed. The car swallowed me up with a devotion you can mistake for comfort if you're not careful. The elevator opened again to the basement. The air here was damp enough to muffle the flashlight beam. Laundry bins stood in blue rows like ships run aground. A mop leaned against a wall where a splash pattern had dried into a map of someplace inland and mean. In the far corner, the morgue door sat square in its frame. No windows, a single stainless handle. The gurney sang against the tiles behind me, and this time, when I raised the light, the beam flared and then narrowed, and the edges of the light bent around a shape that would not accept it. A human outline where no body stood. A head at the correct height. Shoulders sloped with fatigue. The light went thinner there, the way beams do around heat. "Chart," the voice said. Not a demand. An expectation fulfilled so many times it had become a reflex. The gurney's squeak kept time with a heartbeat I could feel in the railing of the elevator car. I lifted the binder and it felt heavier than paper, heavier than plastic, heavier than anything that has to do with names. "Thorn L," I said, because I had to say something and that was the only thing I had. "Discharge at midnight, home with family." The outline moved. Not forward, not backward. A shift, the way a person adjusts to pain. The voice came smaller now, as if the mouth that made it was far away down a long hallway. Home, with family. I thought about the whiteboard instruction written over and over. I thought about procedures. I thought about how hospitals are churches where ritual works not because magic is real, but because repetition tricks chaos into letting you pass. I held out the binder into the dim, and something colder than the basement took its weight. The plastic sleeves whispered. A page turned. The elevator doors started to close, not by my hand, slow, gently, as if to give me time to change my mind. I didn't move. The outline didn't either. The doors kissed, and the car lifted or sank or stayed still and pretended. When the doors opened again, I was back in South. My tape hung from one door like shed skin. The corridor ahead of me was a throat. The red exit signs colored everything with the memory of blood. At the nurse's station, the whiteboard had updated again. Discharge. Failed. The word might as well have been an alarm. A call light erupted above 231, so bright it hurt. The isolation door swung open and hit the stopper with the gentle insistence of a nurse who has done this before. The pass-through window slid open. The binder left my hands without leaving my hands. It was simply no longer where gravity expected it to be. I stepped backward and my shoulder hit the fire extinguisher cabinet. The building's breath deepened. A voice, not the woman from before, not a nurse, spoke from the isolation room. It was the voice that comes from a chest that rails, from lungs that fill with things that should remain in oceans and not in us. "You," it said, as if reading a chart. "You stay." I turned to run, not heroic, not smart, just human. The elevator call button burned alive with an inner light, not electricity, something like phosphorescence breaking through paint. The down arrow pulsed in time with my heart. The car opened its jaws, and I ran anyway because stairs meant corners, and corners meant rooms, and rooms meant doors, and doors meant the chance to get one between me and it. The elevator accepted me with no sound and no lurch. The doors shut. This time, the panel lit 4, a floor that did not exist in South. The doors opened on abandoned admin offices, gray carpet squares, and cubicles with calendar pinholes that still smelled like stale coffee and deadlines. The ceiling grids held half of their tiles. The gurney sang down the hallway anyway. Wheels do not care about carpet. They sing to tile. They sing to linoleum. They sing to you. The voice came from the far end, turned soft by distance. You stay. I realized then what the binder meant, what the repeated forms meant, what procedure meant to the dead as much as to the living. The hospital wasn't empty. It was full of paperwork that never got finished. The last patient's discharge had been written and rewritten and never signed by the right hand at the right time. The ward was holding him. The ward had made the whole building into a waiting room. And I had signed, but I was not the right hand. The elevator doors began to close, and I stuck my arm out, and they met muscle and thought I was a cart and yielded. I stepped back into admin, into the carpet and the smell of toner, and listened. The squeak came closer. Behind it, something heavier rolled, a sound like an IV pole dragging 2 bags of water from a diminished height. I moved toward the sound because every nerve in me said, move toward. That is what you do when seconds matter and someone cannot do the moving for themselves. Thorn, I said, because names matter, even when they are not yours. Leonard Thorn, because the L could be anything and I wanted to be sure. The squeak paused. You were supposed to go home. The outline resolved by refusing my light again. The edges of a robe, the hospital issue kind that gapes where dignity lives. A chest that rose unevenly. A head that bent toward me like a plant finding the one sunbeam in a room full of blinds. I lifted my empty hands. I can't sign for you. I'm not your family. The voice from the isolation room, the other voice, the nurse voice, spoke again from nowhere, and from the binder, and from the whiteboard, and from the hospital's bones. Family notified. No answer. The words came like a reading from a ledger. Disposition. Hold. The outline shivered. A cough rattled the air with no mouth to make it. I stepped closer. Behind the place where a head should be, a halo of air rippled as if backlit by something inside a body. The glow that pressed from cracks in the skin wasn't fire, wasn't light. More like the idea of light chewing through a curtain. Sickly, the way illness paints itself green, and no one knows why. I don't know why I said what I said next. Maybe I had heard 1,000 discharge instructions. Maybe we all have. I need you to take a deep breath, I said. I need you to hold it. I need you to let it go slowly. The outline obeyed. The air thickened and then thinned. Again? The squeak came in time with the breath as if the wheel had a lung of its own. You are going home, I lied, because sometimes you must. The hospital listened. I wish I could tell you there was a miracle. That the chart signed itself in the right hand. That the elevator delivered us to the lobby where families wait with coats over their laps, bleary and relieved, and someone said your name like a reprieve. I wish I could tell you I watched an old man walk through sliding doors into air that hadn't been filtered 5 times and warmed 6. I wish a lot of things. What happened is simpler. The outline stepped backward into absence, like a person making way for a gurney to turn a corner. The air rushed to fill the space it left, and the sound it made was paperwork being filed, a folder closing, a latch catching. The elevator doors opened of their own accord. The car did not glow. It did not hum. It was only a box that moved people between floors. I wrote it down. In the lobby, the clock still didn't work. My watch said 4:19. The logbook lay open on the desk. A new entry in a hand I did not know. 00:00 discharge attempted. Disposition. Hold. Beneath it, a line written so deeply the pen had carved the paper. Stay with patient until family arrives. I signed my own name below that because there are times a signature is not for the paperwork. It is for the person holding the pen. I sat in the chair by the lobby doors and listened to the generator argue with the dawn. Somewhere above me, a call light blinked once, then settled. The elevator bell did not ring. The binder at the nurse's station did not add a page. By my 8th night, routine reclaimed me. Sweep, note times, check locks, avoid admin unless I had to. The isolation room stayed shut. The pass-through stayed latched. The whiteboard settled on a final census that did not include me. But the discharge forms remained in their sleeves, and every time I walked by the nurse's station, the plastic skittered with static like papers on a desk when someone walks past, and I knew that if I pulled the binder free, the top form would still say, Thorn, L disposition, pending. On the 12th and last night of my contract, I brought a fresh pen and a thermos and a small folded note with a phone number I didn't have when the hospital closed. I had found Leonard Thorne's obituary in the town library in a bound stack of newspapers whose ink came off on my fingers. He had no family listed. He had a church. He had a favorite coffee shop. He liked his eggs scrambled dry. The paper called him Lenny. No one had ever written that in a chart. I left the note in the binder, a number that went to no family and also to all of them. A voicemail that said, "This is for Lenny. We're here." It was a lie again, of a kind, but kinder. The hospital took it without comment. On my way out at 6 a.m., the elevator answered a call from a floor without power. The doors opened to the dim lobby. No one stood inside. The car waited. The bell chimed one clear note, not because it could, but because things sometimes do what they are made to do when we ask them to. The doors closed. The building exhaled. The logbook lay open, and the final line, written softer than the others in a hand that did not dig or bruise the paper, read, "Pending family arrival." The word pending had been underlined, and then the underline blurred as if touched by a human thumb that had been pressing a pulse that no longer needed it. I left the hospital into a light that felt chastened by the night. The parking lot held its shadows the way bodies hold water. The generator wound down to a purr. Behind me, in south, a call light blinked once more above 231 and then went still. The building had not let him go. I think maybe it had let me. Weeks later, I drove past the demolition site in the late afternoon. The main building had become a stack of walls without roofs. The south wing stood stubbornly intact, as if the wrecking ball had feared infection. On the chain-link fence, a sign flapped in the wind. Notice of demolition delay. In smaller letters, structural review pending. Paperwork, always paperwork, even when the steel is the patient. That night, my phone rang at midnight. No number, no caller ID. The line hissed like a hallway when it's thinking. Then a familiar voice, calm below panic, said my name the way people say names when they are trying to keep someone tethered. "Stay with the patient until family arrives." I didn't say I wasn't there. I didn't say I had gone home. I listened to the sound of a chart page turning and I said, "I'm here." I do not know how long a hospital can wait. I do not know if paperwork can cradle a soul. I know that buildings, like people, want to finish what they start. I know that discharge is a kind of prayer. I know that I have stopped sleeping through midnight and I have started keeping pens in every room of my house the way other people keep candles. I know that when I pass any elevator, anywhere, I watch the down arrow and hold my breath until it chooses not to light. Sometimes it lights. I do not step in. And if you are ever walking past a shuttered wing and you hear a single bell where no power runs, if you see the tape across a door flutter as if exhaling, if a voice nearby names a room that has not held a bed in years and asks for a chart as if courtesy lives beyond death, you will feel the tug in your hand to sign for someone you never met. Do not, or do, but know what you are promising. Know that once your name lives on the line, the hospital will recognize you the way night recognizes its own. Well, Fright Night Vault listeners, this is the end of tonight's story. If you ever pass a darkened ward, don't press the elevator call button. It's already waiting for someone else. Subscribe to the Vault and never walk alone again.